I never thought I'd come home to this. 3 months away on a civil engineering project in Montana, and I returned to find my family's legacy reduced to splinters and rubble. The cabin my grandfather built in 1965 was gone, replaced by a wasteland of collapsed beams and twisted metal. A bright yellow sign staked into the ground read, "Lakeview Estates HOA property demolished due to unpaid HOA fees and zoning violations." I knelt and picked up a cracked photo frame from the debris. My grandfather smiled back at me, holding a massive trout he'd caught from this very lake in 1968. My hands trembled as I held it. The drive back through the forest road always brought me peace. Tall pines lined the gravel path, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the afternoon sun. This road led to the place where 3 generations of Moors had spent summers fishing, swimming, and simply being together. When I was 8, my father taught me how to tie a fishing knot on the dock. When I was 16, my grandfather told me stories about buying this land, about building the bridge that connected our property to the main road. He made me promise to protect this place. I never imagined I would fail him so completely. I walked slowly around the ruins, my boots crunching on fragments of glass and splintered wood. The stone foundation had been torn apart with machinery. The dock where I'd spent countless mornings watching the sunrise was gone, ripped from its moorings and left in pieces along the shore. Even the mailbox my grandfather had carved by hand, with Moore family etched into the wood, lay discarded in the dirt. The water pipes had been cut clean through. The electrical lines dangled uselessly from a snapped pole. This wasn't just demolition. This was deliberate destruction, meant to erase every trace of what my family had built. I found another fragment, half buried in the soil. It was a piece of the wooden sign my grandfather had hung above the front door. Moore Lake, Est, 1952, was still visible through the grime. I held it in my hands and felt something harden inside my chest. This lake wasn't just named after my family. My grandfather had purchased it. All 40 acres of water, from an old farming estate 73 years ago. Those memories felt sacred, and someone had violated them. Those memories felt sacred, and someone had violated them. I wiped the dirt from the sign and stood up. My jaw tightened as clarity replaced shock. I had spent 2 decades in the Navy as a civil engineer, another decade working on infrastructure projects across the country. I knew how to read property deeds. I knew how to navigate legal systems, and I knew, without a doubt, that whoever ordered this demolition had just committed a serious crime. Then I walked back to my truck, opened the glove compartment, and pulled out a folded piece of paper I kept there for safekeeping. It was a copy of the original deed, signed by my grandfather in 1952. Isaac Moore Sr., sole riparian rights holder, includes all water rights, lakebed, and shoreline. I read the words again, letting them settle into my mind like stones sinking to the bottom of the lake. The Lakeview Estates HOA office sat 2 miles down the main road, a small brick building with perfectly trimmed hedges and a sign that read, "A Community of Excellence." I parked my truck in the visitor spot and walked inside. The receptionist barely looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" she asked in a flat tone. "I need to speak with Monica Trent," I said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I think she'll want to see me." The receptionist sighed and picked up her phone. A moment later, she waved me toward a hallway. "Second door on the left." Monica Trent sat behind a mahogany desk, her perfectly styled hair framing a face that radiated controlled authority. She wore a tailored navy suit and gold jewelry that caught the light from the window behind her. She didn't stand when I entered. "Mr. Moore?" she said, her voice smooth and cold. "I wondered when you'd show up." I stayed standing. "You demolished my cabin. You owed $12,000 in HOA fees over 3 years," she replied without hesitation. "We sent multiple notices to your address. You ignored them. The HOA has the legal right to remove structures that violate community standards and unpaid obligations." I kept my voice steady. Did you have a demolition permit? Her eyes narrowed slightly. We don't need a permit for properties within HOA jurisdiction. Actually, you do, I said. County regulations require permits for any demolition, regardless of ownership claims, and you'd need to verify jurisdiction before acting. Did you do either? And do you have proof that my cabin falls under HOA jurisdiction? I asked. She leaned back in her chair and smiled, the kind of smile that assumed victory before the fight even started. This entire area is Lakeview Estates. You can't just build structures near the lake without HOA approval. You violated zoning regulations. I stepped closer to her desk and placed the folded deed in front of her. That cabin sat on private land, my family's land, and that lake you're so concerned about, Moore Lake. It's been ours since 1952. Every drop of water, every inch of shoreline. It's mine. Monica glanced at the deed, but didn't pick it up. Her smile didn't fade. Property records can be disputed, Mr. Moore, and even if you believe you have some claim, the fact remains that you failed to comply with community regulations. The demolition stands. I folded the deed and slipped it back into my pocket. Then I'll see you in court. She laughed softly. You're welcome to try. I turned and walked toward the door, but paused before leaving. One more thing. Miss Trent, that bridge you and your residents use to access the lake, my grandfather built it. On my land. I'll be in touch. I didn't wait for her response. I walked out of her office, through the pristine hallway, and back into the sunlight. My heart pounded, but my mind was clear. They had made a mistake, a big one, and I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they'd done. The first letter arrived 2 days after my confrontation with Monica. I pulled it from my mailbox and tore open the envelope. Notice of violation, unauthorized structure removal was printed in bold letters across the top. They were fining me for removing the cabin they had demolished. $3,000, payable within 14 days. I set the letter on my kitchen table and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't incompetence. This was warfare. The letters came in waves after that. 5 notices in 1 week, vegetation violations for landscaping they'd destroyed. Dock remnants for wreckage of my own property. An $8,000 environmental fee with no explanation. $28,000 in fabricated penalties, each carrying Monica's neat signature. I studied them like an engineer examining a faulty structure, identifying every weak point. She was building a paper trail to justify a lien, hoping administrative pressure would force me to abandon my land. I felt my anger sharpen into something more useful. Focus, clarity, the kind of tactical thinking that had kept me alive in conflict zones overseas. I learned more about Monica Trent over the next few days. A few phone calls to old contacts in real estate circles painted a clear picture. 5 years ago, she had lost a major development deal in another county because she couldn't secure water access rights. The project collapsed, and she'd lost nearly $2 million of investor money. Since then, she'd become obsessed with controlling lakefront properties. Lakeview Estates was her second chance, a carefully planned community built around Moore Lake. Except she'd made one critical error. She never verified who actually owned the water. Understanding her pattern made everything click into place. This wasn't personal. I was just an obstacle between her and redemption. I found out about her current project when Frank Chen stopped by my temporary rental in town. The elderly neighbor looked uncomfortable standing on my doorstep. "Isaac, I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "Monica's been talking about a new development at the HOA meetings. She calls it Lakeview Luxury Villas, high-end vacation rentals right on the waterfront. She's been showing plans to potential investors for months. Your cabin was in the way." I invited him inside and listened as he explained how Monica had hired a surveyor 6 months ago, someone who'd drawn up boundary maps that conveniently placed the entire shoreline under HOA control. Those maps had never been filed with the county, but Monica used them in presentations to make her project look legitimate. She'd promised residents that property values would triple once the luxury development was complete. She told everyone you were a squatter, Frank continued, his voice apologetic. She said you'd been living there illegally for years, refusing to pay dues, damaging the lake's ecosystem. Most people believed her. She's very convincing. I asked him why he was telling me this. Frank looked down at his coffee cup. Because I was at the meeting when she announced the demolition. She didn't call it that. Of course. She said it was an environmental remediation to protect the lake. But I saw her smile when she said it. She enjoyed it. Isaac. And that didn't sit right with me. I thanked him and felt a small crack form in Monica's armor. She'd been so confident in her control that she'd revealed her true nature in front of witnesses. The following week, Monica escalated beyond fines. She organized an emergency HOA meeting and invited every resident of Lakeview Estates. I wasn't invited, but Frank called me afterward. Monica had stood in front of 70 homeowners and painted me as a threat to their community. Illegal septic runoff, environmental violations, reckless construction is endangering property values. She presented photos of the demolished cabin as evidence, never mentioning that her crew had caused the destruction. She asked for a community vote to formally ban you from all HOA facilities and common areas, Frank said. It passed almost unanimously. People are scared. Isaac, they think you're going to sue the HOA and bankrupt everyone. I thanked Frank and hung up. The isolation was complete now. Monica had weaponized fear and turned my neighbors into her shields. That night, a final letter arrived from Monica's law firm. Final notice intent to place lien was printed across the top. 10 days to pay $28,000 or face foreclosure proceedings. I read it once, then set it down with the others. Monica thought she was tightening a noose. She had no idea she was handing me ammunition. Every fraudulent fine, every false claim, every piece of forged documentation. I opened my laptop and began organizing everything into a timeline. Dates, amounts, contradictions. My hands moved steadily across the keyboard. I wasn't defending anymore. I was building a case. And when I was ready, Monica Trent would discover exactly what happened when you tried to steal from someone who knew how to fight back. I drove out to the lake early on a Tuesday morning, before the sun fully cleared the tree line. The air was cold and still, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles. I needed to check the bridge, the one my grandfather had built by hand in 1953. It was the only crossing over the narrow neck of the lake, the only way for Lakeview residents to reach the main waterfront without driving 8 miles around. As I approached, something looked wrong. The bridge sagged in the middle. Its wooden planks angled downward at an unnatural slope. I parked my truck and walked closer. 2 of the main support beams had been cut nearly halfway through with a saw. Fresh wood shavings littered the ground beneath them. Someone had done this recently, probably within the last day or 2. A new yellow sign had been posted at the bridge entrance. Lakeview Estates HOA unsafe structure, closed for public safety. I knelt and ran my fingers along the cut marks. They were clean and deliberate, made with a power tool, not the result of age or weather damage. 6 months ago, I'd hired a structural inspector to certify the bridge after a particularly harsh winter. He'd given it a perfect safety rating, good for another decade at least. This wasn't maintenance. This was sabotage disguised as safety enforcement. I felt my jaw tighten as the pattern became unmistakable. Monica wasn't just trying to fine me into submission. She was systematically destroying my property while making it look like responsible governance. Over the next week, I began noticing other things. Selective enforcement, Frank had called it, but the term felt too polite for what I was seeing. I drove through Lakeview Estates one afternoon, cataloging violations that the HOA ignored when committed by other residents. The Hendersons had built a dock extension that jutted 15 feet past the approved waterline. No violation notice. The Kramers had painted their mailbox bright red instead of the mandated forest green. No fine. Tom Pacheco's boat, Shed, sat half on HOA common ground. A clear encroachment that had been there for 3 years. Nothing. But I had been fined $3,000 for dock remnants that consisted of broken wood from the structure Monica's crew had destroyed. Every resident I asked told me the same thing. Monica had personally approved their minor violations, calling them reasonable variances that enhanced community character. I was the only one being held to impossible standards. The data told a clear story. 17 visible code violations throughout Lakeview Estates. 0 enforcement actions except against me. I photographed properties with boats parked in driveways, lawn decorations that violated aesthetic guidelines, and fences built 6 inches over property lines. Monica had turned the HOA rulebook into a weapon she could aim selectively. And right now, it was pointed directly at me. The realization didn't make me angry anymore. It made me surgical. Every piece of evidence was another brick in the foundation I was building. Frank stopped by again, this time looking nervous. "Isaac, people are talking," he said, standing just inside my doorway. "Monica's been telling everyone you threatened her. She says you're unstable, that you made vague comments about revenge. Some of the residents are worried you might do something dangerous." I asked him if he believed that. Frank hesitated, then shook his head. "No, but it doesn't matter what I believe. She's good at this. Isaac. She knows how to control the narrative. Half the neighborhood thinks you're a threat now. The other half just wants this resolved so their property values don't drop." I thanked him for the warning and watched him leave. Monica had isolated me completely now. Social pressure, administrative harassment, and property damage. She'd created an environment where any action I took would be seen as aggression, any defense as confirmation of her accusations. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by documents, HOA violation notices, photos of the sabotaged bridge, my spreadsheet of selective enforcement, the original property deed from 1952. I stared at that deed for a long time, reading my grandfather's signature at the bottom. Isaac Moore, Sr., sole riparian rights holder, includes all water rights, lakebed, and shoreline. The words had seemed like family history before. Now they felt like a weapon I hadn't known I was carrying. Monica had made a fundamental miscalculation. She'd assumed I would react like a typical property owner, hire a lawyer, file a complaint, and get tangled in bureaucratic delays while she moved forward with her development plans. She didn't understand that I'd spent 20 years building infrastructure in hostile territories, solving problems that couldn't wait for committees or approvals. I knew how to find leverage, and I was starting to see exactly where hers was weakest. I pulled out a fresh notebook and began making plans. Real ones this time, not defense, offense. Monica wanted a war of attrition. I was about to change the rules of engagement entirely. The county recorder's office opened at 8 a.m. on Wednesday morning. I was waiting outside the door at 7:45, a leather folder tucked under my arm containing every document I'd gathered so far. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, greeted me with professional courtesy. "I need to pull property records going back to 1952, I told her. Everything related to Moore Lake and the surrounding parcels. She typed something into her computer and nodded. "That'll take about 20 minutes. You can wait in the research room." I sat at a long wooden table surrounded by filing cabinets and microfiche readers that looked older than I was. When the clerk returned, she carried 3 thick binders and a rolled survey map. "This is everything we have on file for that area," she said. "The original land grant, subsequent transfers, and all recorded easements." I thanked her and opened the first binder. The pages smelled like dust and old paper, but the information was clear. My grandfather had purchased the entire lake and the surrounding 40 acres on March 14th, 1952. The deed explicitly stated all riparian rights, water rights, lakebed ownership, and exclusive shoreline access. There was no mention of any easement, no shared access agreement, no clause that transferred any portion of those rights to future developments. I unrolled the survey map next. It showed Moore Lake as a private body of water, clearly delineated with boundary markers. The bridge my grandfather built was marked as a private crossing on private land. I traced my finger along the property lines and felt something click into place. Lakeview Estates had been developed on parcels adjacent to the lake, but none of those parcels included water access rights. The developers had simply assumed the lake was public, or perhaps they'd been told it was. Either way, every home in Lakeview Estates had been sold under pretenses. Their lakefront property didn't actually front the lake. It fronts my lake, and without my permission, they had no legal right to touch the water. I spent the next 2 hours cross-referencing every document. I found the original Lakeview Estates development plans from 1998. The marketing materials promised exclusive lake access and waterfront living, but nowhere in the legal filings was there any recorded easement granting that access. I pulled out my phone and called my old friend Richard Chen, a property lawyer I'd worked with on infrastructure disputes. "Richard, I need you to explain riparian rights to me like I'm filing a lawsuit." He laughed. "That's specific. Huh. What's going on?" "Isaac," I gave him the abbreviated version. "Family lake, private ownership since 1952. HOA claiming jurisdiction they don't have." Richard's tone shifted from amused to serious. "If you own the lake and the shoreline, you control everything. Riparian rights give you exclusive use of the water, lake bed, and all access points, without a recorded easement. They have no legal claim, and that bridge it's yours to control. Just post clear signage to avoid liability issues." I thanked him and hung up. My mind was already racing ahead, seeing the dominoes that were about to fall. I pulled up the Lakeview Estates HOA website on my phone and found the property map they used for marketing. It showed the lake in the center with homes arranged around it, boats on the water, and people swimming from docks. None of it was legal. Every single waterfront activity those residents enjoyed depended on access they'd never actually purchased. And that access ran through my bridge, across my land, to my lake. If I closed the bridge, the entire community would be landlocked from the water they'd paid premium prices to enjoy. Property values would collapse overnight. Monica's luxury villa project would die before it started. Investors would flee. Lawsuits would follow. I sat back in my chair and stared at the documents spread across the table. This wasn't just about getting justice for my demolished cabin anymore. I held the key to the entire community's water access, and Monica had no idea. She'd been so focused on bullying me into submission that she'd never verified the one thing that mattered most: ownership. That bridge had become the bottleneck that could strangle an entire development. I gathered the documents, thanked the clerk, and walked back to my truck. The morning sun was bright now, warming the pavement. I sat in the driver's seat and pulled out my notebook. I wrote down 3 words at the top of a blank page. Nuclear option. Drain the lake. Then I underlined them twice. Monica wanted to play games with violation notices and sabotage. I was about to remind her what happened when you picked a fight with an engineer who actually owned the battlefield. I spent the next 3 days gathering evidence with systematic precision. Every piece of sabotage, fraudulent fine, and property violation was documented, photographed, and filed chronologically. I created a digital archive with timestamps and GPS coordinates: the demolished cabin, the sabotaged bridge, the falsified survey maps, even copies of HOA meeting minutes labeling me a squatter, the ruined shell, the saw marks, the torn dock, the yellow signs every angle cataloged. I built spreadsheets cross-referencing 17 visible HOA violations throughout Lakeview, with 0 enforcement actions except against me. Each document was a nail, and I was building a coffin. On Thursday afternoon, I called the county building inspector's office and requested an emergency safety evaluation of my bridge. The inspector, a middle-aged man named Douglas Barrett, arrived within 2 hours. I walked him to the bridge and showed him the saw marks on the support beams. He knelt down, examined the cuts closely, and took his own photographs. "This wasn't accidental damage," he said, his voice flat and professional. "Someone deliberately weakened this structure. You're lucky it hasn't collapsed with someone on it. I asked him to put that assessment in writing. He nodded. I'll have the report ready by tomorrow. You should also file a police report. This is criminal vandalism, possibly reckless endangerment. I filed the police report that evening. The officer who took my statement seemed skeptical at first, but when I showed him the inspector's preliminary findings and the timeline of HOA harassment, his expression changed. This looks like a coordinated campaign, he said, flipping through my documentation. Have you considered getting a restraining order? I told him I wanted everything on record first. Evidence before action. He made copies of everything I brought and assigned a case number. It wasn't much, but it was official now. Monica's actions had a paper trail that extended beyond HOA dispute into criminal investigation. The next morning, I reached out to the few Lakeview residents who Frank had mentioned were unhappy with Monica's leadership. There were 4 of them. Sarah Wolf, a retired teacher who'd been fined repeatedly for her garden exceeding approved boundaries. Jim and Catherine Torres, a couple who'd questioned Monica's handling of HOA funds and been socially ostracized for it. And Ben Kramer, whose dock permit had been delayed for 18 months while Monica fast-tracked approvals for her allies. I invited them to coffee at a cafe in town, neutral ground away from HOA territory. They arrived cautiously, like people who'd learned not to trust easily. I didn't waste time on small talk. Monica Trent demolished my family's cabin and has been systematically harassing me ever since, I said. But here's what she hasn't told any of you. I own Moore Lake. All of it. The water, the lake bed, the shoreline. My grandfather bought it in 1952, and I have the deed to prove it. Sarah's eyes widened. Jim leaned forward. What does that mean for us? He asked. I spread copies of the property records across the table. It means every home in Lakeview was sold with the promise of lake access that was never legally secured. There's no easement on file, no recorded agreement. Monica's been operating on the assumption that the lake is public or HOA controlled. It's not. It's private property. And she's trespassing. Catherine looked worried. If you own the lake, can you cut off our access? I met her eyes. I could, but that's not what I want. What I want is for Monica to face consequences for what she's done. I want the HOA to acknowledge that they have no jurisdiction over my land, and I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Ben crossed his arms. What do you need from us? I appreciated his directness. Information. Testimony. If this goes to court, I need witnesses who can confirm Monica's pattern of selective enforcement and retaliation. I need people willing to tell the truth about what's been happening in this community. They exchanged glances. Sarah spoke first. I'm in. She's been bullying people for years. The others nodded in agreement. Jim pulled out his phone. I have emails from Monica threatening to fine us if we don't vote her way on HOA board decisions. Would that help? I told him it would help immensely. We spent the next hour going through their experiences, documenting Monica's abuse of power. By the time we finished, I had statements from 4 residents willing to testify, dozens of emails showing intimidation tactics, and a clear pattern of corruption that went far beyond my personal dispute. That evening, I sat in my rental and reviewed everything one final time. The property deed, the inspector's report, the police case number, witness statements, photos of the destruction. I had built an airtight case, but I wasn't ready to file it yet. Monica still thought she was winning. She thought her administrative harassment and social isolation would eventually break me. I needed her to commit one more act, one final overreach that would expose her completely. I pulled out my phone and made a call to a hydraulic engineering firm I'd worked with in Montana. I need to hire someone who knows how to drain a lake, I said. How quickly can you mobilize a crew? The hydraulic crew arrived on Monday morning in 2 trucks loaded with portable pumps and drainage equipment. I met them at the lake before sunrise, when the water was still dark and glassy. The lead engineer, a compact man named Davis with weathered hands and sharp eyes, surveyed the lake and nodded approvingly. Private lake, right. You've got full riparian rights. I showed him the deed. He studied it for a moment, then handed it back. Then you're clear to do whatever you want with the water level. We can drop it 6 feet in about 48 hours using these pumps. Won't drain it completely, but it'll expose enough lake bed to make your point." I asked him if it was legal. Davis smiled. "You own the water. It's no different than draining a swimming pool on your property. We'll use controlled drainage to avoid shocking the ecosystem. The pumps are calibrated to lower the level gradually, giving fish and aquatic life time to adjust. No environmental damage, just a temporary water level change. Perfectly legal and safe. Just make sure you've got proper signage posted so nobody claims they weren't warned." I'd already prepared the signs, large metal placards with bold lettering. "Private property, Moore Lake, no trespassing, water level adjustment in progress." I posted them at every access point around the lake, on the bridge, and along the shoreline where Lakeview residents typically launch their boats. By 9 a.m., the pumps were running. The sound carried across the water, a steady mechanical hum that echoed through the surrounding forest. I stood on the bank and watched the water begin its slow retreat. The process was almost meditative, like watching time move backward, revealing what had been hidden beneath the surface. By early afternoon, the calls started. My phone buzzed constantly with angry voicemails from residents I'd never met. The water level had dropped 2 feet, and their docks were already sitting on exposed mud. Boats that had been floating peacefully now tilted at awkward angles, their keels scraping the lake bed. I didn't answer any of the calls. I just let them accumulate, each one a record of panic and confusion. At 4 p.m., Monica's name appeared on my screen. I let it go to voicemail. She called 3 more times in the next hour. On the 5th attempt, I finally answered. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Her voice was strained, the careful control from our first meeting completely gone. "I'm adjusting the water level on my lake," I said calmly. "Is there a problem?" There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, sharp and fast. "You're destroying community property. You're sabotaging the waterfront. I'm calling the police." I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "Feel free. I own the lake. Monica, I have the deed, the water rights, and the riparian authority. I can set the water level wherever I want. But please, do call the police. I'd love to have them come out and verify my ownership on record." She hung up, without another word. By Tuesday evening, the water had dropped 5 feet. The transformation was dramatic. Stone markers that my grandfather had placed in 1952 now jutted out of the mud along the original property boundary. The lake bed itself was visible in wide stretches, cracked and drying in the sun. Every dock in Lakeview Estates was stranded on dry ground. The small beach area where residents gathered for summer barbecues was now 20 feet from the waterline. I walked along the exposed shore and found old bottles, fishing lures, and remnants of previous decades all preserved in the silt. This was my family's land, laid bare for everyone to see. The panic in Lakeview Estates reached a crescendo. I heard through Frank that an emergency HOA meeting had been called for Wednesday night. Residents were demanding answers. Property values had already started dropping as word spread through real estate networks that the community's lake access was compromised. Her investors had pulled out entirely after their lawyers discovered there was no legal easement. The development deal Monica had built her reputation on was collapsing in real time. Wednesday afternoon, Monica showed up at the lake in person. I was standing near the pumps, checking the water level with Davis, when her black sedan pulled up on the access road. She got out and walked toward me with rigid posture, her tailored suit slightly wrinkled, her expression hovering between fury and desperation. "You need to stop this immediately," she said, her voice tight. "You're damaging an entire community. People have invested their life savings in these homes." I turned to face her fully, my arms crossed. "You demolished my family's cabin without permission. You sabotaged my bridge. You filed fraudulent violation notices and tried to place a lien on property you have no authority over. And now you're upset because I'm exercising my legal rights as a property owner." Monica's jaw clenched. "This is Moore Lake. It's been part of this community for decades. I pulled the folded deed from my jacket pocket and held it up. Moore Lake, named after my family because we own it. My grandfather bought it in 1952. Every drop of water, every inch of shoreline, every stone in that lake bed. You built Lakeview Estates on the assumption that this was public water. You lied to investors, to residents, to everyone. You sold lakefront homes without lakefront rights. Her face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly. We can negotiate. The HOA can purchase an easement. We can work this out reasonably. I shook my head. You destroyed something irreplaceable because it was inconvenient for your development plans. You turned my neighbors against me, sabotaged my property, and tried to steal my land through bureaucratic harassment. There's nothing to negotiate. Monica, you're going to face the consequences of what you've done. Starting tomorrow night at your emergency HOA meeting. I'll be there, and I'm bringing everything. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time since I'd met her. Monica Trent looked genuinely afraid. She turned and walked back to her car without another word. I watched her drive away, then turned back to the lake. The water level had stabilized at exactly where I wanted it, low enough to make the point unmistakable, high enough to restore when this was over. Davis walked up beside me. "That the woman who's been causing you trouble?" he asked. I nodded. "She's about to cause herself a lot more." The Lakeview Estates Community Center was packed when I arrived Thursday evening. Every chair was filled, and people lined the walls, their faces etched with worry and confusion. I recognized most of them from my documentation drives through the neighborhood. They'd been my neighbors once, before Monica turned them against me. Now they looked at me with a mixture of fear and curiosity as I walked through the door, carrying a leather briefcase. Frank Chen caught my eye from the back row and gave a slight nod. Sarah, Jim, Catherine, and Ben were scattered throughout the room, positioned as we'd planned. I took a seat in the front row, directly in Monica's line of sight. Monica stood at the podium, her appearance still polished but with subtle cracks showing through. Her hair wasn't quite as perfectly styled as usual. Her smile seemed forced as she called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice projecting false confidence. "I know many of you have concerns about the recent lake situation. I want to assure you that the HOA is taking immediate legal action against Isaac Moore for his destructive and irresponsible behavior. His actions have endangered our community's property values and violated numerous environmental regulations." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. She was still controlling the narrative. Still painting me as the villain, I raised my hand. Monica's eyes locked onto mine, and I saw something flicker across her face. Uncertainty. She tried to ignore me, turning to address another question, but several residents had noticed. "Let him speak," someone called out. "We deserve to hear his side." Monica's jaw tightened. "Mr. Moore is not a member of this HOA and has no standing in this meeting." I stood up anyway. "Actually, I'd like to clarify a few things for everyone here. With your permission." The room went silent. Monica gripped the edges of the podium but didn't stop me. She couldn't without looking like she had something to hide. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a document. "This is the original property deed for Moore Lake, signed by my grandfather Isaac Moore Sr. on March 14, 1952. It grants my family full ownership of the lake, including all water rights, riparian rights, and exclusive shoreline access." I held it up so everyone could see the official county seal. Moore Lake isn't public water. It never has been. It's private property, and it's been in my family for 73 years. The murmuring grew louder. I saw confusion spreading across faces. People pulled out their phones, probably searching property records in real time. Monica's voice cut through the noise. "That deed is outdated. Property laws have changed since the 1950s. The HOA has maintained this lake for decades, and that establishes usage rights." I turned to face her directly. "Then why is there no easement on file with the county I spent 3 days reviewing every property record related to this lake?" There's no legal agreement granting Lakeview Estates any access to the water. Your development was built and sold on the assumption that the lake was available for community use. That assumption was wrong. I pulled out another document. This is the marketing brochure for Lakeview Estates from 1998. It promises exclusive lake access and waterfront living. But none of the property parcels sold here include water rights. You sold homes under false pretenses. The room erupted. Residents were shouting questions, some at Monica, some at each other. A man in the third row stood up. I paid $200,000 extra for a lakefront lot. Are you telling me I don't actually have lake access? Before I could answer, Monica slammed her hand on the podium. This is absurd. Isaac Moore is trying to manipulate you all. He's angry because the HOA rightfully demolished his illegal cabin. And now he's retaliating by making up legal claims. Her voice was rising, the careful control finally cracking. He doesn't care about this community. He's trying to destroy everything we've built here. I let her finish, then pulled out the next set of documents. Speaking of that cabin, let's talk about the demolition. I never received proper legal notice. The HOA had no demolition permit, and the structure you destroyed sat entirely on my private land, not within any HOA jurisdiction. I walked forward and placed photos on the table in front of the podium. These show the cabin before demolition, fully intact and structurally sound. These show it afterward, and these show the bridge you sabotaged by cutting through the support beams. I pulled out the inspector's report. This is from County Inspector Douglas Barrett. He concluded the damage was deliberate vandalism, not natural deterioration. Monica's face had gone pale. Those are lies. The cabin was unsafe. The bridge was deteriorating. We were protecting the community. Her voice was shaking now, desperation bleeding through. I turned back to the audience. 4 days ago, I started lowering the water level in Moore Lake. That's my legal right as the owner. The water level exposed property boundary markers from 1952. It also exposed the fact that none of you have legal access to this water without my permission. I paused, letting that sink in. But I'm not here to punish this community. You were lied to. You bought homes believing you had rights that were never actually secured. I pulled out one final document. This is the development plan for Lakeview Luxury Villas. Monica's been negotiating with investors for over a year to build high-end vacation rentals on the waterfront. My cabin was in the way, so she had it destroyed. She planned to force me off my land, secure the entire shoreline for commercial development, and pocket millions while raising your HOA fees to fund it. I placed the document on the table. She never told any of you about this project. Did she? The room exploded. People were shouting, standing, demanding answers. Monica's carefully constructed authority was collapsing in real time. You can't prove any of this. Monica shouted over the chaos. This is slander. I'll sue you for defamation. I smiled, calm and cold. Actually, you just helped me prove it. I've been recording this entire meeting. I pulled out my phone and held it up. You just admitted, in front of 70 witnesses, that you demolished my cabin. That's destruction of private property. You also just threatened legal action to silence someone presenting documented evidence. That's witness intimidation. I looked directly into her eyes. The police already have an open case. I filed charges for vandalism and trespassing last week. This recording will be added to that file. Monica stared at me, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The polished, controlled attorney who'd sat across from me weeks ago was gone. In her place stood someone trapped, cornered, and out of options. The community center doors opened, and 2 police officers walked in. Frank had called them as planned once Monica started making threats. One of the officers approached the podium. Monica Trent, we need you to come with us. There are some questions regarding property destruction and fraud we need to address. The room went completely silent. Monica looked around desperately, searching for support, but found only shocked faces and betrayed expressions. She gathered her papers with trembling hands and walked toward the door, flanked by officers. As she passed me, she stopped, "This isn't over," she whispered. I met her eyes. Yes, it is. 3 months later, I stood on the newly rebuilt dock and watched the sun rise over Moore Lake. The water had been restored to its natural level 2 weeks after the HOA meeting. Once the legal proceedings were formally underway, the lake looked exactly as it had in my childhood, smooth and clear, reflecting the pine trees that surrounded it like a mirror. The cabin was almost finished. I'd used the original blueprints my grandfather had drawn in 1965, rebuilding it board by board in the exact same spot. The insurance settlement from the HOA had covered the costs, along with punitive damages for the emotional distress and property destruction. Monica Trent faced multiple charges: destruction of private property, criminal trespassing, fraud, and filing false legal documents. Her law license was under review by the state bar. The investors she'd courted had filed civil suits for misrepresentation. Her career, built on control and manipulation, had collapsed under the weight of her own ambition. The local newspaper had covered the story extensively, and the fallout reached far beyond Lakeview Estates. Other HOAs in the county were now facing scrutiny, their property claims and enforcement actions suddenly subject to closer examination. The Lakeview community had gone through its own transformation. The HOA board had been completely restructured. Sarah Wolf was now president, with Jim Torres as treasurer. Their first action was to approach me with a formal proposal, a recorded easement agreement, filed with the county, granting Lakeview residents legal lake access in exchange for annual fees that would fund lake maintenance and environmental protection. The agreement was fair, transparent, and most importantly, legitimate. I signed it without hesitation. I'd never wanted to cut off the community. I just wanted them to understand the truth. Frank Chen helped me install the final piece of the restoration, a new wooden sign, carved in the same style as my grandfather's original, reading Moore Lake, Est, 1952. We hung it above the cabin's front door, exactly where it had been for decades. I stepped back and looked at it, feeling something settle in my chest. My grandfather had asked me to protect this place. For a while, I'd thought I'd failed him. But standing here now, with the cabin rebuilt, the lake restored, and the legacy secured, I understood something important. Protecting this place didn't mean keeping it frozen in time. It meant making sure the truth was known. The boundaries were clear, and the next generation would inherit something real. I sat down on the dock, my feet dangling over the water, and watched a fish jump near the far shore. The lake was quiet again, peaceful, the way it was always meant to be. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah confirming the next community meeting. I smiled and put the phone away. This was home again. Finally, truly home. And this time, nobody could take it away. Sometimes the system feels rigged against the little guy. But Isaac's story proves that knowing your rights and standing your ground can change everything. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt powerless against those who abuse authority, you're not alone. Join our community at Gated Drama, where we share real stories of people who fought back smartly and won. Subscribe to never miss another tale of justice served cold. Your story might be next. Let's keep each other informed and protected.